Today's gospel from Luke 10 is one that is beloved by missionaries. And I know this because from 2003 to 2005, I served as a Lutheran missionary in Cameroon, Central Africa. I had just graduated from the University of Kansas with a bachelor's in anthropology and French, and the ELCA sent me to Cameroon, first to teach English as a second language, and then to provide pre- and post-test counseling to patients seeking HIV testing at a local hospital. It was an unforgettable and massively educational period in my life. All this to say, I know the significance of this passage to missionaries because I was one. Missionary types love this one. It's all about Jesus sending out not just one or two, not just the 12, but 72 men and women. Jesus' ministry is changing focus, and Jesus is using this harvest metaphor that would have been very familiar to his listeners to illustrate what was up. He says, "The harvest is rich, the workers are few. Therefore, ask the overseer to send more workers." In those days, now in many places, many families had farms that were mostly operated by an inner circle of extended family, maybe a couple of full-time workers, but during certain times of the year, like the harvest, the inner circle would not be sufficient, so extra hands would be hired on to bring in the harvest. Jesus is addressing the inner circle, the chosen few, the ones who followed him because he knew them personally. And Jesus is telling them that it's time to shift the paradigm, to bring in followers who are drawn to the message as much as to the messenger. It's been a few years since I was a missionary. Things are so different now. Things are so scary now. There is a clear line of intent in the legal decisions being made by the Supreme Court and in the laws being enacted by state legislatures such as ours here in Oklahoma. Justice Alito's reasoning for overturning Roe removed a cornerstone from America's justice system, that you have the right to privacy in the medical decisions you make. It's the cornerstone that supports your right to decide who to marry, when to have children, and even what you do in the bedroom. Losing these rights is scary for those who fought to bring them into being, and it's scary for those who have never known a world without them. Worse than just the loss of these rights, though, is the loss of a check against the power of state governments to target vulnerable groups, especially queer people and people of color. There is no longer anyone that will stop the most hateful of those in power from hurting our communities, it seems. When things are scary, familiarity offers comfort. I take comfort in the gospel and in the rituals of the church. I take comfort in the music and in the people around me. I take comfort in you. When I am here with you, I feel as safe and connected as I do anywhere. For me, this is the inner circle, the beloved community. As scared and sad as I sometimes feel these days, when I read this gospel, I feel a little hope. In Jesus' instructions to the 72, I see some things differently now than I did 20 years ago, starting out as a missionary. As a missionary, I saw the urgency. Jesus says, "Be on your way," and he tells them not to stop even to pack or to say goodbye to anyone, even if you see them on your way out of town. God will provide, and the message is urgent, so just go. This imbues the message with a real sense of urgency, but this time around, I also notice that Jesus doesn't do much gatekeeping. He doesn't require training or preparation from the ones he sends. He trusts them. He trusts that if they have been with him on this journey, they are capable of representing him. He trusts them with the message, which I will get to in a minute. But first, Jesus says with another agricultural comparison, I am sending you out as lambs among wolves. So, like, more defenseless even than an adult sheep among wolves. Jesus knows that what he is asking of them is potentially dangerous, and he tells them so. As a missionary, I took that on board. Sometimes God calls us to go to places that may not feel safe. That's part of it. God will go there with us. What I did not notice then was what we might expect after a statement like that. Something to the effect of, so this is what you should do to stay safe, or this is who you should trust. Instead, there's no paranoia from Jesus. There's no plan for security. Even missionaries get security training. What does Jesus say is going to take care of these 72? How are they going to stay safe? Let's look. Jesus says, and whatever house you enter, first say, peace be upon this house. If the people live peaceably there, your peace will rest on them. If not, it will come back to you. Stay in that house, eating and drinking what they give you, for the laborer is worth a wage. Okay, so it seems like Jesus is telling them that if the people of the house live peaceably, your peace will stay with them. If not, it comes back to you. But either way, stay with them. Don't even look for a particularly pleasant or peaceful place to stay, but just go with whoever offers. Oh, and while you're there, don't impose your dietary purity code on them. Just eat whatever they give you and stay with them for a while. Stay in that house, eating and drinking what they give you, for the laborer is worth a wage. Don't keep moving from house to house. Don't worry about taking a second job to support yourself while you're doing this. Don't worry about being a burden to your hosts. Let people help you. Okay, I have a confession to make. I've already described to you my job as an ELCA missionary, but I spent a lot of time just hanging out. It's actually in Cameroon that I learned the value of spending hours of unstructured time with people of my community. It was unequivocally some of the best and most valuable time I spent while I was a missionary. So I appreciate that Jesus lays down some clear parameters for how to eat and hang out and be with people, combined with a very simple message. Jesus told the 72 to do it, and it's a big part of building community. Simple shared time together can help to build a network that can sustain activism. When I shared my fears with my therapist, she acknowledged that while there are many who are being radicalized to fear and hate us, she reminded me that there are entrenched communities that will sustain and protect you. Shared time and meals together without judgment is how we build such communities. The next phrase is significant in the context of Luke Acts, first century Palestine. And whatever city you enter after they welcome you, eat what they set before you. Different cities were often associated with different ethnic and religious groups with distinct dietary purity code. Jesus didn't tell the 72 to go out and teach those you encounter how to follow Jewish dietary law so that they can be in line with God's commandments. Nope. He says, whatever city you enter, eat what they set before you and heal those who are sick in that town. And then, after you have eaten with them and shared time with them and lived according to their ways, after you have helped them in a material way by providing medical care, then you can get to the message. Then you may say to them, the reign of God has drawn near to you. That is a message that invites conversation, I think. But what does it mean? It appears that Jesus foreshadows the Pentecost here when he extends the light of God that's present in himself to these 72 people that he sent out, as if they become little Christs, carrying within themselves that little burning piece of the reign of God. It certainly seems that way, because that is literally the only message that this passage tells us that Jesus passed on to them to share. The reign of God has come near to you. Something else I noticed this time around is the consistent messaging. Jesus says, if the people of any town you enter don't welcome you, go into the streets and say, we shake the dust of this town from our feet as testimony against you, but no, the reign of God has drawn near. That's exactly what Jesus told them to say to the cool people, the ones that they're instructed to eat and heal and hang out with. So it's the same message. It's not unlike how I am learning to be in the world as a trans man. You can accept me or not, but who I am isn't changing. If someone misgenders me, it doesn't change the reality of who I am. And in this passage, I hear a life-affirming truth validated. This is something that as a queer person fills me with something like relief. Jesus says, whether they want to hear you or they don't, who we are doesn't change. And neither does what we say. And neither does our reality. The reign of God has come near, whether they welcome it or not. Who I am and who I love is valid, and it doesn't require the acceptance or permission of anybody. It is not my job to convince anybody to accept me. I will simply thrive in spaces where I am accepted. When Jesus says, if they don't welcome you, go into the streets and say, we shake the dust of this town from our feet as testimony against you, but know that the reign of God has drawn near. This is so empowering. Jesus gives his representatives permission to move on. How many of us have felt stuck in relationships where we spend so much time and energy just arguing for our right to exist without a constant mask? When Jesus says to them, we say, shake the dust of this town from our feet as testimony against you, it feels liberating to me. If you are not welcomed, you can just speak your truth and move on. In the same way that Jesus tells them that if it doesn't feel right, they can just bail, I will use a moment of my time here to remind each of you that it is not on you to convince anyone of your right to exist, and that you have permission to move on. And if you cannot physically move on because of reasons, you still have permission to move on mentally and emotionally. The last thing that I overlooked as a missionary are four words that floored me this time around. The words are, when the 72 returned. Not 70, not 71. They all made it back. Every single one of them made it back from this very unstructured feeling mission into territory where there was no guarantee of safety. In fact, there was guarantee of danger, lambs among wolves. Maybe I missed this before because I was in my early 20s and I felt immortal. Or maybe it was just a safer time. When Jesus sent them out, he sent them out like lambs among wolves, he said. There were risks, but it worked out okay. Better than okay. They did not simply return, they returned rejoicing. Sometimes things work out okay. Sometimes everybody makes it home. Not home to the place that you're from necessarily, but home to the beloved community where you are accepted and appreciated entirely, embraced in all your humanity. Amen. And I'm just going to do the next one.